Now, I would like to invite Barbara Borkin from AARP to introduce our key speaker.
Good morning, everyone. You know who I am. I am a volunteer with AARP Colorado, and I have had the pleasure of meeting many of you over at our table. I'm honored to be here today as we support and empower all caregivers. AARP Colorado is a proud sponsor of this event, and we advocate and provide resources for you that include educational materials, hosting online forums and discussion groups. And we participate in local events such as today's Care Partner Summit. We advocate for you to have the necessary tools and resources, not only for your loved ones, but for making sure that all of you are taking care of yourselves. Please stop by our table today or check out our resource center at aarp.org/caregiving for more information. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Barton, who is here on behalf of AARP. Jane, an expert on caregiving, has dedicated her career to supporting and educating caregivers. Jane will give you a deeper introduction of herself and delve into today's topic. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in welcoming Jane Barton.
Thank you, Barbara. You're very kind. I appreciate it. Hi there. How are you? I got to get my technology up and running here, so just a moment. Get that microphone out of the way. All right. I'm going to be doing two things at once, clicking for my computer and clicking for the screen. So we'll see if I'm talented at this, and if not, cut me a little slack. So I want to welcome you to the Care Partner Summit as well. It's been a few years since I participated in this programming, and I have to tell you, I have a real heart for you as a community. I oftentimes will present at various support groups along the Front Range. I've made some great friends over the course of 20 years doing this, and I just want you to know that I have a real gratitude for what you do, and I'm also in awe of the things that you are capable of doing, that you're willing to do for the people that you love and the people that you care for. So just know that I'm here to honor you today, and hopefully something I have to say will enlighten you to a new resource or a new way of thinking about being a care partner, or maybe an insight into what caring, how it affects you. Because sometimes you're so focused on the person you're caring for, you forget about yourself. Well, today I'm going to focus on you, and I hope you don't mind that. You're going to be in the spotlight. So today, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks, certainly. See if this is clicking. Here we go. To the Parkinson's Association for the invitation to be here today, number one. And number two, to Barbara and to AARP Colorado for sponsoring my efforts as well. Now, for those of you that are new to me, how many of you have never seen me present before? Yay! I love meeting new people. So look around and recognize other people have actually survived the experience, so you need not be afraid. But I want to give you a little thumbnail sketch as to who I am and why I'm passionate about education and talking about actually some tough subjects. Obviously, my name's Jane Barton. My company is Cardinal LLC, and I serve as an educational consultant, which means I get to do what I love each and every day. I serve as a speaker, a writer, and/or a listener, and I focus on the topics that I'm passionate about. That includes aging, end-of-life care, and obviously caregiving. I have a background in hospice and palliative care. I started out as a chaplain in 2004. And then I moved into the directorship of education for a palliative care institute here in Denver for a number of years. I launched my company in 2011. Now you're probably looking at me and thinking, So what did she do before 2004? Well, I can guarantee you I'm not a trust fund baby. I'm not a kept woman, so I had to do something to earn a living. So I was in finance for a few years, and before that, I worked in the oil patch. And there may be some of you that have worked as a geologist as well. So a rather curious professional path. But really what I do today, I'm motivated out of my own story. Like many of you, I've been called to care numerous times. And my initial calling was when I was 15 years of age. My mom was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, and her daughter, as that role, I think, required at the time, I answered that call to care. I was part of her care team for 8.5 years until she died. And that proved to be the formative event of my life because I learned so much. And my greatest learning is that knowledge is power. And without it, life can be pretty darn scary. So whenever I speak, whenever I write, I think about you, the audience, and what information might be beneficial to you so that when you're challenged by life, you can make an informed choice instead of merely reacting out of fear, because that never serves us well. So that is always my mission. That is my calling. And that certainly is what I'm focused on today as we talk about compassion fatigue. Now, how many of you have ever heard of this term, this type of stress? Okay, well, if you're new to it, we will fill in some of the blanks, but I can guarantee everyone in this room has experienced compassion fatigue. Because if you have ever cared for anyone, you are at risk for this kind of stress. And through this process, we recognize that sometimes it actually hurts to care. And so what I want to do today is help us to understand what this is and then figure out how to mitigate it and manage it a little bit better. Because we can't eliminate this risk from life, but we can learn how to recognize it and then deal with it in a more life-giving way. So today, the heart of the matter for my discussion with you is we're going to explore this journey of caring, which entails witnessing. And we're going to recognize how witnessing the suffering of another person exposes us to this risk of compassion fatigue. Then we will recognize some of the signs and the symptoms so we know that we're dealing with a type of stress. And then in the last half of the program, we're going to talk about ways to mitigate and manage this particular kind of stress, hopefully giving you some tools in your toolbox that you can take home with you. So today, like many of you, I feel that I am, by nature and nurture and necessity, a caregiver. And that should not be surprising to any of us if we understand the nature of being human. And I want to share with you a reflection from Henri Nouwen, who was a well-known theologian of the 20th century. And I want to thank Rose for reminding me of this reflection. She sent this to me just this week. Oh, what a timing, right? Not coincidental. But Henri Nouwen notes that to care is the most human of human gestures. It is a gesture that comes forth from a courageous confession of our common need for one another and the grace of compassion that binds us together with brothers and sisters like ourselves, who share with us the wonderful and painful journey of life. In the very act of our caring for another, you and I possess a great treasure. One of the greatest riches of caregiving is that it embraces something more than simply a focus on cure. Caregiving carries within it an opportunity for inner healing, liberation and transformation for the one being cared for and the one who cares. And because we who offer care and we who receive care are both strong and vulnerable, though in different ways, our coming together is a caregiving relationship. It is an occasion to open ourselves to receive an unexpected gift. But in order to be open to that possibility, to receive that unexpected gift, we need to engage this journey of caring and witnessing the suffering of others in a knowledgeable, knowing way. so that we care for ourselves in the process of caring for another. So again, I have been called many times to care for someone. My mom initially, my dad, my brother, my godmother, a handful of friends, and then I've served in a professional capacity. And just like you, on those unique experiences of caring, they've all been a little bit different, predicated on what I brought to the table, how old, what experience I had, what knowledge, but also the relationship I had with each person, and also the uniqueness of the disease process as well. So there were a lot of differences in each of those journeys, but the one thing that was common is that every time I answered the call to care, I witnessed a lot of things. Some things were very distressing, some things were life-giving, but we need to recognize as a caring companion, we are serving as a witness to life and companioning our family, our friends, our clients, and our colleagues. We must be prepared to witness the heartbreak of others because we will see that. You have seen that. And I see a few heads nodding that you realize, yes, that is part of the process. So if we go in with our eyes wide open, we can be prepared to recognize that there are going to be some major medical issues. Again, in the context of a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, you realize that you need to understand not only the diagnosis, but the prognosis, not only focusing on the needs of today, but also of tomorrow. You will witness the subsequent financial issues, just an overarching concern on how are we going to pay for all of this. Again, that just adds a level of complexity and also of stress as well. As we companion those who need our help, we also will witness the interpersonal issues. We recognize that a diagnosis is certainly a personal challenge, but it's not private. It affects everyone the individual with the diagnosis knows, everyone that's caring for them, everyone that loves them. So there's a ripple effect. There are also emotional issues that we will witness. And we will also move into spiritual issues. Because when life takes a turn, and we know that a change in health is a major turning point in life, it's natural to ask, why? Why me? Why my loved one? And so if you've ever had a moment of doubt, don't feel ashamed of that. That is a natural consequence to feeling as if this is not fair and life is now uncertain. But it's also a very risky place to be when the pillars of faith that we've always trusted, that we've leaned against during the dark nights of the soul, all of a sudden we feel as if, wow, these are a little shaky now, if not shattered. And witnessing someone else going through an existential crisis, that will grab your attention as well. We also, as companions to individuals that are dealing with a disease process, we recognize the countless losses each and every day. And sometimes they're minute, they're incremental, but they build up over time. And it's hard to see someone grieving those losses, loss of physical abilities or cognitive abilities, or the ambiguous losses. You can't put your finger on what it is, but something's changed. A change in the daily rhythm, a change in the daily norms, a change in the hopes and fears. So I think you get the picture. As we are companioning people, it's overwhelming as we witness what they are going through. And we can't help but be affected by it because we are caring, compassionate individuals. So I would imagine there are some days you feel as if you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Do you resonate with this image? Yeah, I do. There have been moments in my life when I feel as if, wow, I don't know if I can carry this around anymore. And it's because witnessing distressing situations, witnessing the situation of someone you've known and loved perhaps all of your life, it starts to take a toll on us because it grabs our hearts and it also transforms us. It transforms how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we see the world. And it changes our expectations of what is to come. So it is a big test when we answer that call to care and we agree to be a witness to it. Now, this may be a different kind of definition of caregiving. Perhaps you haven't ever described yourself as a witness, but perhaps it makes sense today. And maybe that will dial into how your journey of caring, why it is affecting you so. Because being a witness to life can be, and oftentimes is, stressful. Because there are days we recognize that it truly hurts to care. It's heartbreaking sometimes. So that begs the question, if this call to care is filled with so much risk, why in the world do we say yes? Why do we answer that call? Sometimes without even thinking, just like I did when I was 15 years old. Well, according to Dale Larson, who wrote The Helper's Journey many decades ago, but his work is still relevant, he says it's because we are other-centered kinds of individuals, meaning that we focus outward. And when we see someone in need, without hesitation, we will say, sure, I will do that, and I will witness your experience. I will figure it out as I go sometimes. And he describes witnessing in this way. Our witnessing reflects who we are at our core, at our essence. It's not just what we do. The distinguishing qualities of successful witnesses include sensitivity to the distress of others, flexibility, genuineness, empathy, and respect. These are not simple external behaviors that you can assume at will, at your convenience. They are the product of a lifetime of experiences that shape us into the particular kinds of people and witnesses that we are. So caring is not just something we do. Witnessing is not just something we do. It reflects who we are at our core. And we recognize it makes a difference in this world. So if we are going to continue to fill the call to care and answer subsequent calls to care, we need to go in with our eyes wide open, recognizing the risk. And so today I'm highlighting a major risk for all who care, and that is compassion fatigue. Now, perhaps you can also relate to the image of the koala on the screen. There are some days you just wonder if you can lift your head up, right? So let's begin to understand this experience, this particular kind of stress, and understand the signs and the symptoms, and then we're going to figure out how to deal with it. So what is compassion fatigue? Well, it is rooted in the over-identification with the suffering of another person. Perhaps you've been there, done that, you know what it feels like. Or it's the overexposure to the suffering of another person. And for you as care partners, I would imagine that is more relevant as far as the definition today. I know many of you are living with the person that you are caring for. So you may feel as if you are on call 24/7, 7 days a week. That is overexposure to their suffering. So if you look at the literature and the experts in the field, they describe this kind of stress as a secondary stress disorder, meaning the disease is not happening to you, but you are observing or witnessing the experience in another. So it's a vicarious trauma, again, because you over-identify or you are overexposed to their suffering. Now, the real lesson for all of us to learn today is that if we don't understand this kind of stress, we don't recognize it in ourselves, and it goes unaddressed, unmitigated, it reduces our capacity and our willingness to care. We get to the point that it just hurts too much, and we refuse to do it. That's what we're trying to avoid. Now, where does this come from? Why are we at risk of compassion fatigue? Well, it's a consequence of our inherent empathic nature. If you look at the book by Jamil Zaki, he wrote The War for Kindness. he noted that humans are the most empathic species on Earth. And that's not a bad thing. Actually, that is a very good thing because empathy actually facilitated our survival as a species. So just think about it. Tens of thousands of years ago, when we were roaming the earth and we started out as hunters and gatherers, we learned fairly quickly that there was safety in numbers. If we didn't want to be the main course for the predators roaming the earth at the time, we pulled together and we protected each other. And as we banded together, we started to look around and say, well, hey, I not only need you, but I kind of like you. I want to be around you, and I care for you, and I care about you. And that has persisted down through history, and it has served us quite well. We realize we are relational creatures. Going alone, going solo is not going to serve us well over the long haul. Now, Zaki goes on to describe empathy. He says, empathy actually refers to several different ways we respond to each other. And he describes it in this way. He uses empathy as kind of this umbrella term underneath which he describes three different subsets of empathy. He said there are moments in which we will be sharing a moment with people. We will share in their suffering. We can empathize with them. There are moments in which we will be thinking about the experience of others. And then there are moments when we are caring about what people are going through. And so he goes on to explain that emotional empathy is when we witness the suffering of another and we can relate to it. It's a known for us. And so we start to take on some of their suffering. We feel their suffering. We start to mirror their emotions. Now, if we don't have good boundaries and we continue to take on their suffering, that's when we can get in trouble. The second kind of empathy that he describes is cognitive empathy, and this can actually expand our worldview. We try to contemplate, well, what must it be like for my husband to go through this experience of Parkinson's, or my wife, or my friend, or my colleague? And then if we can see it through their eyes, perhaps we can appreciate their reactions and their responses a bit better. Instead of judging them, we can appreciate them. And then the third kind of empathy that he talks about is empathic concern. And this is when we care about the experience of another and we have a compassionate response. So this begs the question, what is compassion? Well, compassion literally means to bear or to suffer with. And so if you see someone in distress, if you see someone who is hurting or in need, you have an emotional response to that. It grabs your heart. But there's more to compassion than that. There is a relational response to it. You want to do something to resolve their issue. You jump into what my social work friends call, you jump in the fix-it mode. Now, this is when you can get frustrated because some things are not fixable. And that's true with a change in health that is progressive and ultimately terminal. You can witness it, but you can't fix it. So again, kind of summarizing the work of Zaki, empathy you can view as a three-legged stool. So you have the type of empathy where you're sharing in the emotions, you're thinking about the emotional response of another, and then you're caring about the distress of another person. And Zaki encourages us to expand and to deepen our capacity to empathize with other people. This is a valuable skill and learning. But I have a cautionary note. Just like with any other strength, if we overplay our hand, it can become a weakness. Even though empathy leads to a gentler, kinder world, if we overplay it, when we care too much, when we take on too much of the suffering of another, or when we see too much, we're overexposed, that is when things start to pile up and it becomes burdensome to be a care provider and to be a witness to life. Now, I learned this when I was working in hospice early on, when I was being mentored by some amazing individuals. And they were kind enough to recognize that I was not doing well the first year, that I was taking on too much of the pain of the people that I was serving. And I thought I was succeeding. It was like, man, I'm working really hard. I'm caring about my patients. But I was becoming disabled by their suffering. And so I had to recognize I could sit with someone for a short period of time and help them hold their pain and their suffering. But when I left the room, I had to give it back. It was not mine to bear. It was not mine to hold. An important lesson for all of us to learn. So this begs the question, well, who's at risk for compassion fatigue? And maybe you're sitting there thinking, maybe I get a hall pass. Maybe I don't have to worry about this. That's not how compassion fatigue works. We're all at risk because we all are caring, empathic individuals. So all kinds of professionals are at risk for this. And actually, this is where the research began, researching why so many healthcare professionals were overwhelmed by the work that they did. This dates back 50 or 60 years. And now, thank goodness, we have awakened to the fact that another demographic in our society, the backbone of care in our country, family caregivers, certainly at high risk for overexposure to the suffering of the people that they're caring for. So we are now presenting a lot of programs to community members, not just to professionals. Another population I think sometimes that is ignored in this discussion are care receivers. Now, I know you are here as care partners, but the people you're caring for, they are witnessing the suffering of those who care for them, the impact of that diagnosis on the family system. And oftentimes, at least the care recipients I've talked to, they feel isolated and alone in carrying this stress because they have no one to debrief with. They have no one to talk to about it because they don't want to burden the member of the family that's caring for them and already doing so much. So we are wise as caregivers to be sensitive to that. Also, volunteers with all kinds of organizations and agencies in our community, whether it's the Parkinson's Association, hospitals, hospices, other disease-specific agencies, again, interacting with people that are going through some tough times, certainly at risk for compassion fatigue. And if you're continuing to work today, if you have a job, I would imagine you have colleagues that when you listen to them, you recognize, hey, they're having a really difficult time at home. They're caring for their mom, their dad, their spouse, whomever. And maybe you have some friends that you've chatted with recently. The point is this: we are all at risk for compassion fatigue. And it matters not how much education or training you have. This is a common concern for us. Just consider the article that was published in 2015 in Time magazine about doctors in training and how they were struggling with what they talked about in this article as burnout, not compassion fatigue, but that really is what they were referring to. I read this on a plane going to a conference, and it was very distressing to me because it was written because it recognized the increased incidence of suicide in our physicians throughout our country. And the source of that angst, the reason for that tragic choice, was oftentimes they had no idea how to deal with what they see day in and day out at the office and how to handle their emotions about that. They were overexposed to the suffering of their patients. And so many medical schools actually have changed the curriculum, and they include time for residents to come together and not talk about clinical subjects, but just to talk about how they feel. And they get to debrief in a safe environment. And in this article, it quotes a young resident, a woman, who shared with the class this statement. She said, she tells the groups that when she was shadowing a medical team as an undergrad, she saw a patient with terminal cancer, and it gave her nightmares for weeks. This week, as a resident, many years later, she says she saw a similar case and felt nothing. That is the tragic culmination of unrecognized, unmitigated compassion fatigue. We flatline emotionally, and we can't tap into any emotion, good or bad. Basically, what we've done, sometimes unconsciously, we have thrown our arms out and we are keeping the world at bay. And yes, we will continue to care, going through the logistics of caregiving, but we're not going to allow anybody to touch our heart again. We build a very thick, very high wall around our heart and our emotions, and it's a very safe way to live, but it's absolutely numbing. Now, I've talked to many a community member, and when I describe this, they start to nod their head and they will share with me, it's been years since I've cried. It's been years since I've laughed. It's been years since I have felt anything. And I think that is too high a price to pay in caring and witnessing the journey of another. So that's why I'm addressing this particular kind of stress today. I also think it's important to recognize that as I speak, if you're sitting there nodding and you're thinking, wow, I think I've experienced this before, or maybe you're knee deep in the trenches of compassion fatigue, this is not something you need to feel ashamed of. You don't need to hide it from anybody, because this is not about success or failure. It doesn't mean you have to try harder, do better, learn more, be a better caregiver. It just means you need to recognize the inherent risk of caring. You need to recognize that you need to care for yourself while caring for another. That's all I'm saying today. I'm not saying you're doing poorly or you're doing well. I just want you to be well in the process. And how do we do that? Well, first we need to be able to recognize what compassion fatigue looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like. And sometimes it's kind of hard to recognize that in ourselves, right? Sometimes I'm the last one to know that I really have gone off in the weeds. And it's my friends that give me a course correction. They will say, hey, Jane, I think something's going on with you today. And usually they're right on the mark. So just know we can serve as that compassionate mirror for those in our lives. And if we think they're stressed, then state it in such a way that's not blaming or shaming, but it shows that you're paying attention, that you care about them, and that you love them. But for about the next 12 or 14 slides, I'm going to show you images of what compassion fatigue oftentimes looks like. And I would imagine you could relate to a few of them. If you relate to all of them, please find me sometime today and we can have a chat over a hot cup of tea and maybe we can debrief a little bit. So, what does compassion fatigue look like? Well, for some of us, there are days when we feel like we are just barely hanging on by our fingertips. And one more thing, one more request, one more change, and we're going to drop like a rock. Other times, people feel irritation. Now, looking at this image of this, hopefully sometimes lovable little creature, this is not a spirit you would want to be around, right? Little snarky, little cranky, kind of pissy. Well, your family and friends, they will let you know if this is how you manifest stress, because when you walk in a room, your energy is shooting out and it's sharp and spiky, and people are going to be running out of the room. And you will look around wondering, well, where did everybody go? And what is that about? Again, pay attention to reactions of others. Some people get very anxious. Anxiety can be a manifestation of this kind of stress. And when you're anxious, it's like you're living at a higher frequency, hypervigilant, just waiting for that next shoe to drop. And it's a very exhausting way to live, isn't it? And what about your emotions? If you carry this kind of stress, you have aberrations from your norm. Now, you may be a naturally emotive person, but if you are crying at the drop of a hat, if you are raging at the simplest little things each and every day, that should tell you that something is amiss. And it's time to figure out, why am I so emotional these days? Perhaps you're struggling with chronic fatigue. Exhaustion is very common when you're stressed. And this is not just, oh, I need to get a better night's sleep. I need a good 8 or 9 hours. This is a soul-sapping, bone-weary kind of tiredness because it relates not only to physical exhaustion, but it's emotional, psychological, mental, and sometimes spiritual. And then certainly there are mental health concerns to be aware of. We know that depression is a huge risk within the caregiving population. And depending on the resource that you look at, it's estimated between 40 to 70% of care partners in our country have depressive issues at some point in time in their journey of caring. Another manifestation of compassion fatigue is isolation. So you just don't have enough energy to offer to socialize with other people. And you're feeling stressed and you're feeling anxious and you're frustrated. And so after you complete the task for the day, you just withdraw into your safe space. Now, this is my preference when I get stressed. I isolate and insulate. And I've given my friends permission to call me on it. And so if I've been off the radar screen for a while and they know something's going on in my life, my phone blows up and they will not leave me alone. And I thank God for that, because otherwise it would be a very lonely existence. But this is not going to serve us well in the long haul, because we know as caregivers, we're going to need some help. We need a collaborative team that will help us. So isolation is not a good option. Also, in dealing with compassion fatigue, everything just seems harder. We're already overwhelmed. We are consumed with the task of caregiving. And any little thing that crosses our path or we have to add to our to-do list is an inconvenience, and we resent it because it's just another thing I have to deal with today. Another interesting manifestation, and one we need to be very attentive to, is doing the blame game, particularly within family systems. This can blow up a family and destroy relationships. So let's say you're the primary care partner, you're the primary caregiver, and you are over-functioning, you are over-caring, you are over-giving, and you are experiencing compassion fatigue. And you start to look around to the rest of your family and you're thinking, well, this could be resolved. We could handle all of this if my brother would step up, if my kids would help me out, if my neighbors would pitch in. And you start pointing fingers at people and blaming them. Well, they may be looking at you and thinking, wow, she is doing way too much. And so there's a disconnect between the perception of the situation. So before you start blaming people, try to sit down and have a reasonable conversation, describe your experience, and find the courage to be vulnerable enough to ask for help. Say, I need you to help me in these specific ways. And usually that invitation, you'll get some takers. You'll create a community that will serve you well. Now, another aspect of compassion fatigue, and this sounds counterintuitive, if you're already overwhelmed, fully occupied, over-functioning, why would you work more? Well, it can be a distraction. I've talked to many a caregiver, and they tell me that they barely have time to breathe during the week, but they just volunteered for another shift over the weekend. I'm like, why are you doing that? Well, it gets me out of the house. It's a mindless task. I don't have to think about what I'm feeling if I'm distracted with work. You can also do this in the home. You might have a few hours off in the afternoon, but you decide, oh, I'm going to clean the closets. I'm going to empty out the drawers. I'm going to scrub the tiles in the bathroom, because you don't want to have that time to contemplate the reality of your situation. So work that certainly can be overwork can be a sign. And what about disruptions of sleep? Any of you struggle with sleeping? I would imagine. And it's the aberrations. Some people sleep too much. Some people can't sleep at all. And all of these other aspects can lead into frequent medical issues. We know when we're stressed, our immune system is compromised, and we are more susceptible to all kinds of diseases. And then the last thing I want to highlight are excessive behaviors when we're stressed. Many of us become nervous nibblers. So you start eating anything within arm's length. And certainly sweets are appealing to me, especially chocolate. But some people will decide they don't want to eat at all. They lose their appetite. Another excessive behavior has to do with drugs. And that can lead to a tragic situation, whether they're prescription medications, over the counter, or illicit drugs. And certainly numbing out with alcohol, this is a sign that some things are not working. This is readily available, it's legal, and it's effective. You can numb out and feel nothing again, but it can lead down a path that can be incredibly destructive. So this is not a comprehensive list. You may have some manifestations you could add to it, but the point is pay attention to these signs and signals that something is not working in this caregiving scenario for you. Because if you don't recognize the signs, there will come a day when you will awaken and you couldn't care less. Just like the resident that we had described in the Time magazine article. You will flatline emotionally, you will push the world out to the extreme, and you may have a very safe existence. But again, it's no way to live. There are better ways to do this. So where do we go from here? Well, understanding some of the manifestations that are possible. This is when a bit of self-reflection will serve you well. And I know there are handouts on your table, but in those handouts, if you didn't get a copy, we can email you one. I have a list of exercises that I hope will help you to awaken what you're feeling and why you are feeling it. And the first one is the starting point. How do you manifest stress? What is your typical mode of operation when you're stressed? And you may think, well, I'm old enough and wise enough. I know that. I get headaches. I have GI issues, whatever it might be. But it is powerful to take a pen and a piece of paper and actually write it down. You will be much more intentional, much more in tune when you start manifesting stress. Now, if today you recognize, well, maybe I am. Maybe I've just been in denial. What do I do now? Well, I have a few pointers on how to manage and mitigate compassion fatigue. First, and this is something Kay Adams will pick on this afternoon, she will lead you by the hand and explain the blessings of boundaries. But I just want to tee up her conversation by saying that boundaries are your friend. Boundaries are necessary personally and professionally. You need to know your limits. You can't do all things, be all things all the time without compromising your own health and your well-being. So what we need to do is recognize what's mine to hold here, what is not. And it's okay to have a limitation, to talk to the person that you're caring for, to set realistic expectations, to say, this is what I have to offer. This is what you need. And you negotiate that boundary, you manage it, and if you need additional help, you fill in the blanks. You create a collaborative team. You hire professional care. You explore the different options available. But you accept that you have limitations, and that's okay. You don't have to do it all. Also, by establishing boundaries, you can recognize the reality that you can't fix everything. You can't go into that fix-it mode and get resolution every single time. That doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you are accepting the reality of your circumstances. Now, I've listed what you can't do, But what you can do is this. You can choose to be brave enough to witness the suffering of another person, to be present to that, to stay with them, and to complete the journey. This is one of the hardest things we'll ever do, but it is possible as long as you take good care of you in the process of taking care of another. Now, another idea for managing and mitigating compassion fatigue has to do with transition rituals. This may be a new idea to you as well, I don't know. But realize that when you're called to care, all of a sudden you have a new job description added to all of the other job descriptions you had previously. So if you've been called to care for your spouse or your partner or your kids or a friend, that intimate relationship is still there. But now you have a practical relationship, and that is the relationship of caregiver and care receiver. And we have to figure out how we switch roles day in and day out. Because if we don't transition from the practical to the intimate, and we do it intentionally every day, what ends up is that we're on call 24/7, 7 days a week, in that care partner role. So think about the person that you're caring for. For example, you may be caring for your mother. Well, the caregiver, care recipient role, that's the practical role, the day-to-day, what do we have to do? What do we have to accomplish? What doctors are we going to today? But do you take the time to nurture and to embrace and to value the intimate role that has always been there, the mother-daughter relationship? Most people I listen to in the community do not. They do it occasionally, maybe on a special occasion, a birthday or a holiday. But they reflect back to me, well, who has time? I'm too busy doing everything. So I encourage you to carve out maybe 5 or 10 minutes every morning, 5 or 10 minutes every evening, and just sit down over a cup of coffee, cup of hot tea, whatever you enjoy drinking, and just chat with the person you care for as you normally would. Talk about the family, talk about the news, remember when, talk about vacations that you so enjoyed. Anything but caregiving, because you don't want to lose that intimate connection, that love, that commitment, that relationship that you so value. That is the relationship that will support and sustain you throughout the journey of caring, and it will remind you of why you are doing this. So this leads us to the next exercise in your handout. I'm asking you, how do you transition from the practical to the intimate? And maybe a better question is, do you ever transition from the practical to the intimate? An important question to consider. Now, the last suggestion and invitation I have for you today to mitigate compassion fatigue is I am preaching the gospel once again about self-care. It is not optional if you are to care well and to be well over the long term. Now, I know you have probably heard this mantra numerous times, but we learn through repetition, right? So I'm going to try it one more time and hopefully woo you over. But the goals of self-care are these: balance in the experience of caring so that you can have a sense of wholeness and alignment in your day-to-day existence. And in order to achieve this, you can't ignore the red flag warnings that we just looked at, all those images of how stress is manifest. So if you've had headaches for the last month, if you've had trouble sleeping, if you're arguing with your other family members, if you realize you're not feeling anything, whatever the sign might be, don't think, well, I'll get to that later. I don't have time to deal with it. You can't afford to ignore it because it could lead to a medical crisis for you. So I'm encouraging you each and every day to engage in the practice of self-care. Please resist the temptation to go online and Google the top 10 reasons and also best ways to engage in self-care, because it will only add to your stress. The experts will highlight, you should get 7 to 9 hours of rest every night. You should eat a healthy, balanced diet. You should de-stress with friends at least once a week, maybe take a vacation. And you should exercise for 30 minutes to an hour each and every day. Now, if you are a stressed out care partner in the trenches, you barely have time to go to the bathroom once a day, you will be enraged by those suggestions, right? Because it's not possible. You don't have that much time. So when I think of self-care, I invite you to contemplate what is attainable, what is possible, and what is enjoyable. Don't make this punitive like a diet. You will never do it. So you need to ask yourself, okay, well, if I'm going to do self-care, what fills me up? What's refreshing? What's invigorating? What's inviting? Then you might think, well, okay, well, what brings me joy? Not just a fleeting moment of happiness, but I mean pure, unadulterated joy that oozes from your pores. And then, what soothes my soul? What brings me peace? What brings me solace? What centers me? Now, you'll all have a different answer. For some of you, it may be meditation. For others, maybe a quick little walk around the block. Maybe communing with your favorite pet. I don't know. But then you're thinking, and I know this because I know you, you're thinking, well, this sounds great, Jane, but I have no time, right? Are you thinking that? Maybe some of you are. Well, I anticipated that pushback, so I want you to consider this bright idea. And this is not of my creation. I was blessed to meet a caregiver in the trenches years ago who taught me about the benefits of a 5-minute plan. And I want to share this quick story with you, and this will basically conclude our time together. I was doing a presentation, actually an 8-hour workshop on caregiving years ago. 8 hours is a long time. It's a big commitment. And I was honored that we had a room full of caregivers, and we were chatting about all aspects of being a care partner. And there was a woman in the back of the room that I'd never met before, but she stood out in the crowd because she was 6 feet tall, number one, hard to miss. She had bright red hair, and she absolutely radiated joy. And I wanted to meet this gal, but I was busy babbling away, doing my thing. So at the end of the day, I was so excited. She came up to the front of the room and she introduced herself. So we chatted a little bit, and I said, well, why are you here? And she said, well, I'm a caregiver. And I said, well, may I ask who you're caring for? She said, well, my husband, he has Huntington's disease, which is a very arduous, very difficult journey. And I also know it's genetically transmitted through a family. So my heart was going out to her at that revelation. And she said, and, like, oh my gosh, what else? She said, my son has a cognitive impairment so rare, there is no name for it. I'll be his caregiver for the rest of my life. It's like, oh my God. And my mom was just diagnosed with brain cancer. She's moving in with us next week. I will care for her. And I work full-time. This woman was probably 45 years of age. Now, with that revelation from her, I was just feeling the weight of all of her caregiving responsibilities. And I reflected back. I said, I am standing in awe of you. I said, you found 8 hours to come to this program that you should be teaching, number one. Number two, you're standing vertically and making complete sentences. And you are radiating joy. How do you do that? And she said, I have a 5-minute plan. And I said, honey, you need to package that and market it because you will be a multimillionaire if this is the result. I said, what do you do for 5 minutes a day? And she said, well, I've trained my family. They know not to bother me from 8 o'clock to 8:05 in the morning. I go into the only room I can lock in our house, and that's my bathroom. So I go in, I lock it, and I go to my throne, and I put the lid down. I assume the position. I pull out my iPod, and I select a couple songs that I need to hear that day. She said, I love music. She said, I select those songs, I put my earbuds in, and I crank that sucker up as loud as it'll go. And for 5 minutes, I'm lost in the music. And when that music is completed, I will stand up, I look at myself in the mirror, and I point, and I say, Sammy, get back out there. This is your life. You can do this. And she said, and I do. I have, and I will. And I was just speechless. And then I finally looked at her and I said, I get the sense you're a type A personality. And she started laughing and she goes, yeah, just a little bit. And I said, well, I actually have a challenge for you. She said, okay. I said, I think you need a 10-minute plan. You are worth 10 minutes a day. And she kind of threw her shoulders back and she set her jaw and she said, I will take that challenge. And then we concluded our conversation and off she went. Now, I never imagined I would ever see her again. I'd never seen her before in my life. And so life went on and things unfolded. And about a year later, I was in Scottsdale, Arizona. I was speaking at the national conference for the Huntington's Disease Society. And I'm on stage like I am today, just babbling away, doing my thing. And I look to the back of the room, and there is the glow. There is the red hair. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I could hardly wait to finish. And I ran down the stairs, up the aisle, and I threw my arms around Sammy. And I said, oh, it is so good to see you. How have you been? What are you doing? And she said, oh, well, I'm happy to report to you that I have a 15-minute plan. And I just had to smile. It's like you will always be an overachiever, right? My point being, and I'm not disparaging or comparing your experience of being a care partner to Sammy's, but if Sammy could carve out 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, we can all do that. And the consequences are life-changing. I witnessed that in her. And I have preached her story to almost every caregiving event that I've been part of because I think it is so powerful, because it is possible, it is attainable, and hopefully you can discover something that is enjoyable, that will bring you joy, fill you up, and soothe your soul. So the third exercise in your handout is this. What's going to be your 5-minute plan? And maybe you already have one that you do. You can just expand on it. Move from 5 to 10 to 15. But once you get hooked on it, you want to do it religiously from the people that I've spoken with. And you want to continue to evolve and expand that practice. So to conclude today, I want you to remember these few things, if nothing else. You must care for yourself in order to care for others, to care for the person that you are companioning, the journey that you are witnessing. So I'm inviting you today, first and foremost, to nurture your compassionate and empathic heart. It will serve you and yours well. Now, if you've been to some of my programs before, you know I always have a heartfelt closing ritual. It's just an excuse to say one more thing to you. But I want to share with you a lovely reflection by the Dalai Lama, and I think there's no better way to conclude today. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. But we need to be intentional in expanding our empathic, compassionate hearts and do it in a way in which we don't overplay our strength such that it becomes a weakness. This is not being selfish. This is being realistic, remembering that you must be well in order to care well. Now, a few resources to remind you of related to this journey of caregiving. If you want to check them out at your leisure, you can always stop by my website. I have events and blogs and podcasts and community resources listed. And maybe you'll find something of benefit for you and yours. If you're looking for a book on caregiving, I wrote this a few years ago. It's available in most of the libraries scattered around our city. Or if you choose to buy one, you can certainly go online to Amazon. We can buy anything on Amazon, right? And if you are a fan of podcasts, I have Cardinal Musings with Jane Barton. Many of the topics are related specifically to caring and caregiving. I would also like to highlight a resource you may not be aware of, and this is offered through the Colorado Respite Coalition. They are affiliated with the Easter Seals Foundation, and they actually offer vouchers for respite care, so they can help you to defer the cost of respite. So go out on their website, call them up. They also have additional educational virtual presentations, and they have connections to community resources as well. And then AARP Colorado, they have a phenomenal resource online. This is their Family Caregiving Resource Center. Just a wealth of information on all aspects of caregiving, whether it's the logistical part, the financial, the emotional, the psychosocial. They have videos, blogs, journal articles. It'll take you a while to search through this website, but again, knowledge is power. And on that website, you can download PDF files, different brochures, whether it relates to family caregiving guides or preparing to care. So avail yourself of all that information so you can be well and care well. So I want to thank you for allowing me to share a bit of the journey with you today. It is always my delight, honor, and privilege to participate in this summit. Know that I'm sending you many blessings on your journey. And if I can ever be of help to you and yours, feel free to send me an email at cardinallife@msn.com. I guarantee you I will respond, and I would love to continue the conversation with you. So thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I think I have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Jane. That was absolutely beautiful and so vital and important. So thank you for that beautiful presentation.
My pleasure.
Yes, we do have a few minutes.
Okay.
So we can take just a couple of questions. So does anyone have a question? There are some people with microphones who will be walking around, so just raise your hand high. Any questions?
I've totally baffled and befuddled you.
We have one right here.
Stuff that I missed, I look at the video later.
This was recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There will be a link, I think, to the video, so you can watch it at a later date. And also those handouts, any quotes, any statistics, any resources I noted, it's contained in that handout as well.
Other one right here.
I ran into a situation caregiving for my mother where she was here in Denver and she had professional caregivers, but I was trying to be her daughter. My brother's physician, who lived across the country, did not come to Colorado, but was micromanaging everybody from the other part. So I was doing a lot of the things that you were doing. And he was there with the clinical blood pressure is this and this is this and that's that. How do you recommend dealing with that? Because that added to the stress for me, for her, and for her professional caregivers.
That's a particularly thorny situation in families when you have members that are proximal. They're in the trenches, they're there day to day, hands-on, caring for an individual. And then you have the distant figure, the long distance critic. And that can generate a lot of resentment because they make declarations or requests that just aren't viable and they're not rooted in fact. So it goes to effective communication. And sometimes that's easier said than done, predicated on the history of your family. And also, not disparaging doctors, but oftentimes doctors think they know all. And if your brother is older than you, oh, you're the oldest. Well, there you go. There's the culture, right? So you're going to have to overcome that in some way. But sometimes just by declaring how it is affecting you personally and emotionally, and being vulnerable enough to name your distress, and also to declare what you're hoping for, that I need your support right now. And I need you to support me not only with data, which is safe for your brother who is a doctor, that's his area of expertise. He may be fearful of going into the emotional pond and feeling what is happening about your mother.
We have one more question from an online viewer.
She's asking for ideas for balancing the constant grief that shouldn't be stuffed, but not become overwhelmed.
Grief is a constant presence, well, I could say in life, but certainly in the journey of caregiving. Because when you are caring for someone who has a progressive chronic disease, as we noted, every day there may be instances where you recognize something has changed, something has been lost, an ability or an opportunity, your dreams and hopes, whatever it might be. So it's not that we can avoid grief, but we can become better at finding the courage to confront it and deal with it and move through it so we can live beyond it. If we try to deny it or think we're just going to deal with it later or discount it, think it will fade away, that's not the reality of grief. It has an infinite shelf life. And until we look at it, touch it, feel it, and process it, we can't hone the sharp edges off of it. So grief is very personal, but it need not be private. So I think one of the best ways to deal with the grief we experience as we care for another is to have safe places to articulate what we're feeling. So a grief support group, a beloved friend who is a phenomenal listener, or maybe engage in the practice of journaling. That is where I will emote what I'm afraid to articulate verbally. But if I can see it on paper, it gets it out of my head and my heart. It becomes real and tangible. And oftentimes that's when my resolution will become evident for me. So grief is not to be denied or to be run away from, but instead we need to learn how to embrace it and live with it.
Well, if there are other questions, I'm sure you can find Jane and ask those. But let's give her another round of applause for a beautiful presentation.